Welcome to Lights Out. I'm John Weiss.
And I'm Andy Henderson.
And today we've got a long show for you, so I'm going to hit this really fast. We've got Boris, industry expert, manufacturing expert. He's been doing this for over 30 years. And we're going to talk today about where the industry has come from, where it started, where it's going, and everything in between. Let's hear from Paul. Paul, thanks so much for joining us today. Would love to get your take on where's the industry started and in your experience, where's it today and where are we going?
Yeah, well, listen, thanks for having me. Hopefully I can share some insights. I've been in the space about 35 years at this point. Everything from running investment cash boundaries and working in the body shop at General Motors to really large industrials, software folks, and the folks making complicated equipment. And a couple of things to me that I think have emerged. It's the old story of nothing's really new anymore. We've been having this conversation of getting data, making a connection between the top of the organization and down to the bottom of the organization, front line. We used to say shop floor to top floor, sensor to boardroom. And, every time a company comes out with a new spin on that, we all kind of chuckle because we're like, look, that story's been around for decades at this point. The difference is that we're actually doing two things. One is around the organization itself. The folks who started at the front line, and I've asked executives this question specifically. They're in a leadership position. I said, you got a lot of manufacturing and operations background. How did you get there? And there's this trend around kind of the 40-year-old MBA where the leader coming out of manufacturing then gets sent back to finishing school. They polish them up a little bit, they give them some business acumen, and then they move them up through the organization. So that's big because at first we were looking at a lot of business acumen, business minds, and those business minds didn't quite understand what happened in operations. Now we're taking operations folks and they understand, and they also have a propensity for action and a desire to make things simple. The second piece that's really big is the push over the last decade to really start collecting and censoring up in a more reasonably uniform way. And companies like Microsoft and Amazon and Google have done a really good job making connections down to that lowest level data and making it securely pass up into the cloud, so that now that executive who says, look, I should be able to look at these machines, I should be able to understand what's going on with them, whether it's as simple as dashboarding or as complicated as getting insights on how the assets are performing. Why can't I do that? And then around that, kind of wrapping those two pillars, is a community of next gen companies creating the software that leverages all that. So when you bring those three together, it's actually a really exciting time in the manufacturing space and folks that are trying to drive really complicated processes.
So for that first one, are you saying that in the past you had the people coming up from the shop floor and they go through maybe some business training and they be promoted up the ranks of the company, and that's where you started at some years ago was in trying to provide data solutions, database solutions to help those people out, and now the pendulum is sort of swinging the other way. Is that did I take that?
Yeah, actually flip it, because in the past, and look, I'm not saying this to insult anybody. In the past, it was the offspring of the business owner who, now that they had money, they sent them to Harvard. They got a Harvard MBA. They came back and they said, "Let me tell you how we're going to make roofing shingles far more effective," right? And all the guys on the plant floor are saying, does he actually even know how to make a shingle and how to push the start button on the machine? So they had very good business acumen and they understood how they wanted to drive a business. They just didn't understand how it related down into the bottom of the organization. And at the same time, like you described, those folks were moving up through the ranks. So when everybody kind of got to a point where they said, wonderful guy, wonderful woman, great understanding of business, no understanding of our operation, they can't help us exploit what we're doing. This person over here has been here forever. They seem to have a mind for business. Let's get them a little formal training. Let's shave them or, polish them up a little bit and then put them into that executive role. Not picking on your beard at all. So, but that's what's happening. If you find I'll challenge you. If you get into a discussion with a senior executive and you say, you know, you sound like a real manufacturing operations person. Where'd you start? I started here. How'd you get to this role? They'll kind of tell you this story, how somebody mentored them, how they got, you know, some B school experience, and now they've got a really well-rounded, but a very deep-seated understanding of how the business is run in manufacturing in general.
It's almost like the first evolution of the human capital transformation, if you will, right? When we look at how the people have changed, and now we're kind of going through that again now as we adopt new technologies. We're looking at upskilling workers. Andy and I have done a couple sessions on that, and it's hearing you talk, I kind of think of this as almost version 2.0 of that transformation of what people look like in these environments, right?
Well, so look, Uber's the most overused example in these transformation stories. And everybody wants to talk about a company that has assets and doesn't own assets. That's the worst use of that example, in my opinion. I would use something like you just referenced. I've got somebody who aspires to be an entrepreneur, owns a car and a phone, and lives in a metropolitan area. And they say, hey, I think I can start a business. In an hour, they could start a business. In 2 hours, they could actually be earning revenue from that business. And where those organizations succeed is where they find a way to say, hey, you're pretty good. Let me upskill you so you can do more and more valuable things. Kind of like Amazon will sell you some trucks and you could start a prime delivery service yourself. Right. But in manufacturing, think about those really well-trained, mechanically oriented people, understand math and science, who either didn't have the opportunity or the attention span to go into an engineering program or a management program. They spent 4 or 5 years on the floor, and now they're saying, hey, there's more stuff out there for me. They can become either an executive rank by that training, or you think about these tools around AI and machine learning and how we're actually coaching them at a rate that they would never have been coached before, whispering in their ear and saying, pay attention to these couple things. You know, so-and-so who just retired after 30 years would know this inherently somewhere in their brainstem. The math and the science and the machine is now actually whispering to that operator, and they're becoming upskilled that much faster. And it's allowing them multiple paths. It's actually a quality of life thing, I think, that maybe is the most exciting part of it.
Using technology, specifically AI and analytics, to basically what you're talking about is supplement tribal knowledge, right? People that are taking the some of the secret sauce, right, to how these things happen, and using technology to supplement that. That's pretty cool.
Well, and you know, I heard somebody presenting today, I'm sure they didn't maybe think this phrase through, but they said, you know, 80% of outages on a plant floor are completely unexpected. Well, I mean, if you start with that premise, you've lost. They're not completely unexpected. They may have been unseen, and they may have been unseen because the precedent events were buried in the data, and maybe I didn't even know where to look in the data, right? But like, that's like saying, you know, I should go out and pray to the rain gods every morning before I'm going to the plant because that's where I'm going to get my best chance of performing well. I just don't subscribe to that. The data, the availability of data is huge these days.
Yeah, and we have it these days.
So what you're describing, I mean, where do you see us at on the currently on the continuum between because I think about, you know, maybe 5-10 years ago, I was participating in all these external conferences and about data collection. Everybody say data is great. What are we going to do with it? We've progressed now a few years, and I think people are making use of the data. But I think you probably laugh at this because it's the same conversation over a continuum. But now I see a lot of people using that data, but I don't necessarily see. I see a lot of promising things happening in this like mentorship space that you're describing. But how long before it really grabs on and the industry starts doing that and starts championing? What am I trying to say? Just before it really becomes adopted, right? Before people actually start using it.
Yeah. So I think it's happening in corners and pockets with kind of courageous leaders and folks who are really curious. Yeah, I've always been curious. I'm always poking around at the tech. I'll date myself. I used to hang out and talk to the at that time it was all women, it was the women who did the punch cards at the GM plant, at the assembly plant in Tarrytown, New York, because I'm just like, what are you doing? How are you doing? Why are you doing it? What's going on? And, you know, the curiosity is what's spurring these different pockets that are saying, hey, there's something we could do. I think what will make this a flood is the generation that's coming up that's truly looks at technology as just woven into the fabric of what they do, right? So you see that 2-year-old that picks up a magazine and the funny video on the internet, and they're swiping at the magazine and they don't understand why the picture's not changing. That's because they look at the iPad and they go, well, of course you just swipe this and go to the next page. When they come into the environment, into the manufacturing environment, and then go home at night and do their podcast about their music, or they do their photography, or they do whatever, and they're connected in that sense, they're going to come back in every day and say, hey guys, this is stupid. Like, you got to be kidding me. Like I stepped from 2020 into 1995, and you just put up a sign that said, congratulations on our big, you know, next generation strategy, right? So they're going to push it because they're not going to tolerate it. There's a gig economy thought process that's, you know, fire me, I'll go drive Uber or whatever, that's fine if you don't like what I hear. And the folks like me who are really senior and have seen all this stuff, if we're not looking at it and going, why not? Why do I have to have a meeting of 19 people in here telling me about the next 9 months of acquiring, harmonizing, rationalizing, standardizing, parking all our data, and we picked the wrong database model and the wrong schema in the stop already, right? Start something, prove the value really quickly, use that as a cascade to drive the event. I'll give you one example that struck me, and this is about, at this point, 3 years ago. So I'm in New York City at the National Retail Federation show, right? All the retailers are there, and we go into a meeting with a huge consulting firm and a huge packaging manufacturer, global packaging manufacturer. And the problem is that the retail outlet with beverages on the shelf, stockouts are, they claimed, $1 trillion problem. Somebody wants purple sport drink and there's only orange sport drink, and apparently I drink whatever, but apparently people get fixated on that. So you can't just use better robots and everything else. They're talking about literally embedding an RFID tag into the blow molded bottle, so that, and it's a tenth of a penny for these new tags, close read type stuff, so that the shelf will read not just as a bottle in there, but I will know that it's orange, or I will know that it's blue, or I'll know whatever the color is, and I'll know as they go down, and I'll be able to order more and get it shipped. And they were all excited about that. And I said, do you understand what you're talking about? They said, what do you mean? I said, do you understand you just invalidated kind of this construct of a thing called MES in a manufacturing plant? No, what are you talking about? I said, if this bottle shows up at the door of the plant, gets loaded into the process, goes through the laner, the rinser, the washer, the filler, the capper, comes out the other end, I've got a half a dozen engineers figuring out how to connect to that filler and tell me how many units were made an hour. All I have to do is read how many tags went in and how many tags came out, run the math up in the cloud, I'm done. I said, we spend billions of dollars a year doing this. And they all kind of looked at me and they were like, yeah, okay. Anyway, so let's talk about the retailer, right? It just didn't even sink in. Somebody, and this is Microsoft that's really driving a lot of this stuff. Somebody at Microsoft gets it. They're not out there beating the drum for how they're going to gut everything that we kind of understand in the manufacturing and the execution space and controls and automation. They're just putting the stuff in, and maybe they don't get it. Maybe they're just smart enough to know that's a better way to do things. But those are the examples. Somebody's going to look at that and say, I'm going to build a whole different supply chain, value chain, process, visibility tool. And it's all parts and pieces laying around. So I'm a little long-winded. Does that make sense? Kind of how I think people are going to start adopting this.
It does. And I think that's a great example, because most people that I talk to are still fixated on how do I collect my set point data and how do I measure it against my throughput, and then give me a flag when something happens. Nobody talks about, let's look at the finished product.
The naming convention? Because I didn't get the latest update to the naming convention for start and stop time on not that class filler, but this class filler, because this is a XYZ brand and that's an ABC brand, and we have different standards. I mean, Andy, we went through this stuff, right? The book was this thick of the standard, and I would say, can you send us just the first couple pages so we can get? We haven't put that all together yet. And it's like, okay, shoot me.
Well,
I mean,
along these lines, it's not the exact same thing, but I did not ever like the conversations where I'd go ask, I'd be on the floor trying to get access to some data system, and I'd go talk to the people that own that data system, and they'd say, well, what do you want and why? I'm like,
what are you going to do with it? Is it going to be secure? Because, Andy, the only way we can't put that data electronically, the way we secure it is we print it out on sheets of paper and we hand it to people. And I'm like, you never saw somebody stick something in their pocket and go home? I mean,
well, it's safe because we put it in the shred box when it's done.
Yeah, I hope. But think of the security. So now you want the data. Why do you want the data? What do you want to do with the data? That's the lifeblood of this facility. You're out there saying, I think I can make something better. Even if you're out there saying, hey, Andy, you're goofing off and I'm going to prove it. The reality is it's not that person's data. It's the company's data. It should be available to everyone who has an idea for exploiting it. As long as you don't break the system, right? You're not banging up against some system and you end up crashing the machine or taking too much CPU away. But all of that tech is available today, right?
That's what I was going to say. And, rather than trying to be a gatekeeper to every single individual, maybe there's some sort of credential system that says, hey, this person, they know how to be a good steward of the data, and therefore let them have access. That type of thing.
So go back to these digital natives. I walk up to the key, right? Now we're in this pandemic, COVID, don't touch anything. I double tap on the side of the phone. I don't even touch the phone, or maybe I have my watch on. I just hold it near the reader. And what happens? Two things happen that always amaze me. Number one, it makes the payment. Number two, I get an alert on my phone before the printer that's attached to the cash register begins to spool up and print the receipt. I get that information already. I've got better access to data from my device. So you'll never get me to believe that the HCM system that says Andy is qualified for this type of work and this type of data, he's cleared for this type of clearance, he doesn't have an ITAR compliance issue, blah, blah, blah. When he wants to buy cookies, it says you're not allowed to buy cookies, right? It says you're not allowed to get access to the data, or scan the card, yeah, you have access. People will look at this and think this is about an organizational change, and it's got nothing to do with an organization. It's got to do with a mindset change, a culture change, and somebody saying there's no reason we shouldn't handle data this way. Everything we're talking about, guys, there's nothing we're talking about that's not available today for free on a device that I pay somebody so that I can use, let alone I bought and I bolted to the floor in my plant. It seems ridiculous to me.
So what do you say to the people that say, yeah, that's good from a consumer standpoint, because if it screws up for an individual as a consumer, okay. But if it screws up for me and my operation and it shuts my plant down for 30 minutes, an hour, half a day, that's a big deal. Like, what do you say to those, to that?
Right after you're done praying to the rain gods, maybe we should talk about this, right? That mentality it can only be addressed, or that, I shouldn't say mentality. The folks in operations are focused on, I've got something I've got to get done by the end of the hour, the end of the day, the end of the week. A commitment has been made that's been taken, a commitment made by someone else and rested upon my shoulders. I don't have a choice. I've got to meet this. That's my job, is to figure it out. So they don't typically spend a lot of time kind of understanding why these things are different. I think this goes back to kind of the work you and I did in a previous life when we teamed up, which is to say, we could talk about this for the next 9 months, or we could actually drop into one location and try something. And what's the worst? And you know what, Andy, let's pick a place that we have a lot of spare parts inventory, that if we're down for a day, it's not the end of the world. I like to say, big enough to show value, small enough so that that if it's an utter disaster, we can bury it in the backyard. We all get to keep our jobs. And if you can describe it that way, we could show some value. If you could show some value, and this is literally what happened with us, right? It was one work cell. It was 4 or 5 people involved,
Right.
and an entire monstrous industrial organization started showing up at the door saying, hey, can we walk through there and see what's going on? Because we could use that.
Yeah, the notion of proving a concept, and then once you've proven it, or once you've iterated on it a couple of times and proven the value, then you expand that whole. I overquoted: think big, start small, scale rapidly.
How long does it take for you? If I said to you right now, I got something critical I got to do. I want you to spin up a cloud instance, and I want you to start storing some data for me. I'm going to give you a path. How much time is that going to take?
Seconds, quite literally.
Yeah.
How much money is it going to take? Dollars.
Pennies to get started.
Pennies, right? This all comes full circle, because now, if we're not going to be courageous enough to look at somebody and say, yeah, Andy, take a few seconds and here's a couple bucks and show me what it is you're talking about. And when you get that next generation coming along that says, dude, my whole house is wired. I can like start the hot tub on the way home on a Friday afternoon. I certainly can get data from that machine and give you better visibility to issues that are about to occur before they fail. I think it's a people thing. It's not tech anymore. It's not demand or need or ROI. It's whether or not you're going to find a courageous leader kind of in my era who's going to say, look, I'm just going to get this done, because my job's going to be, I'm going to be replaced by someone who's going to say, dude, I don't know why you sat on this for so long. You could have driven tremendous waste out of a process. That's what it comes down to. You want to talk about carbon. You want to talk about, if you're a global warming advocate, or you believe in it, you don't believe in it, I don't care. Carbon is a proxy for waste. If we should focus on something and say, let's just eliminate carbon, if you think it's good for the environment, that's fabulous. What I know is it means that we took waste out of a process. All of these things are starting to kind of converge, and they're going to create this kind of nuclear reaction, chain reaction of how industry is going to change. It's a great time. I'm having more fun. I've been down at a longwall operation, 800 feet underground. One thing I didn't get to do was go on to a oil rig, get choppered out to an oil rig. We were supposed to do that, never happened. I've seen every type of process. I've seen cruise missiles being made. I've seen rockets being launched. I can tell you that I'm more excited now than I've ever been in this space. It's awesome. Some cool stuff.
So Paul, you mentioned earlier at the beginning of this that we're doing a lot of stuff today that we used to do years and years ago. It just has kind of a new name to it, and that struck a chord with me. So I gave a keynote speech yesterday, and one of the first comments I got, I got on the topic of digital twin, and one of the first comments I got in the chat box was like, hang on, dude, we were doing stuff like this, 35 years ago. We're just now calling it digital twin, right? And so I want to get your take. What are some of the stuff from your perspective, some of the things that we're doing today that we were doing back then, and what are some things that really are truly new that are changing the landscape a little bit?
Yeah, I think the things that we're doing, or we continue to do, that we've always done, maybe a little bit more focused, is really staying fixated on standardizing things, right? Standard work, and not that I'm an advocate of standard work or some of those theories, but the reality is, if we're going to run a value stream, we want to have people talking about things in a standard way. We want to have people executing things in a standard way. We want to have them flagging things in a standard way, because that allows for better communication across the facility. So we've done that for quite a while. Lean, Six Sigma, these tools have been around, and we've built upon these in every cycle that we've come through. Andy and I were just talking about this the other day. And what that allows for is a disciplined approach to the accumulation of data. So, it's a little tough if all the data is completely garbled and just plowed in, because we're not quite at the point where we have those tools that allow us to take totally free form data and do something with it. and make sense of it unless somebody's sitting there labeling it. So as organizations have been building out a lot of sensors, the new stuff, creating a lot of new data elements and applications, the thing that's always been driving the process has been a disciplined, thorough, thoughtful approach to how we classify things. And the good part is it doesn't have to be across an entire business. I don't have to have my operation in Latin America and my operation in Canada, my operation in the US doing it all the same way. I really need this cluster, this cell of machines or this line or this facility doing things reasonably consistently, because naming conventions are a higher order from the lowest level data. So that now I've got enough of a pool of data. I can pull insights from that data. I can start to say, I see things. Well, now you got to go to Latin America. They don't call downtime, they call it something else. There's a different language. There's all these other things. Yeah, it doesn't really matter because the underlying data will be fundamentally the same. So I think the discipline is being done the same. I think the scientific approach, I think if we go back to some of the early folks driving lean, it was a matter of using the tools they had at the time. And now we're saying, okay, let's use these new tools we have, but let's not get rid of this scientific approach that we should be applying to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, what I've said before is, go back to Frederick Taylor in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He was walking around with a clipboard and a stopwatch, collecting data from his operations and then using that data to make better decisions. Sounds really familiar, but fast forward to today and it's better set of data collection tools, better way of managing that data long term, and more computational power to do more advanced analysis on that data. That's big things that you see.
One of the projects I kind of cut my teeth in a much bigger sense was, at this point, it's probably 15 years ago, was with one of the CPG companies, beverage manufacturer. Everybody know the name, and a really smart guy that worked there, a friend of mine, a guy named Ken Owens, and Ken. We had the ability to get right to the machine data and bring the machine data up and bring up the downtime codes associated with the machine. So, I'm like, hey, this is great. It's going to be automatic. The operator doesn't have to touch anything. And he said, yeah, no, we're going to have the operator enter the down codes. I said, why would you do that? He said, because they've got no connection to the data. They have no interaction with the data. They don't understand that this machine went down. I see it go down. I see the dashboard light up and there's something that's in there. And then I instill some process discipline in this. And then I can say to them one day, we've really got this thing dialed in. Now I'm going to flip it into the automatic mode. I'm going to bring that in automatically. He said, because what's going to happen if we go to automatic mode, all we have to do is once say the machine's down. And when he looks over or she looks over and sees it running, they're going to go, hey, your system, it's garbage. That's running, it says it's not running. This is a way to get them involved. And it just goes back to this methodology of getting people engaged early, kind of getting their mind around what's going on, and then having them help drive the process as opposed to having a process driven on them. So the clipboard is probably still a good idea. If I had a new manufacturing intern, I would say take a clipboard, walk around the whole building, talk to every supervisor. I want this data. What are they going to say? They're going to say, don't you have a phone, man? You don't have a dashboard? You don't have email? I'm going to say, well, what are all their names? Do you know anything about Andy? Do you know anything about John? You will by the end of this week, because you'll have visited them 40 times in the course of a week. So that's the human part of it that is never going to, in my lifetime, we're not going to have the robots running the factory and just a lights out factory. We can't keep cars in between the lanes all the time yet. We're not going to be able to turn these plants over to the AI machine or the robot.
That's interesting. Do you think I digress. Do you think that it won't happen at all, or it won't happen at scale, at large scale, meaning everybody's doing it?
I think it won't happen in a fully integrated, bulletproof process. I think it will happen in clusters of devices grouped together. Phones are very good. Some apps are bad. Apps are very good. Some phones are bad. I can get a good app and a good phone. I get a cheap phone and a cheap app, free app, whatever. So it'll be this kind of menu of tools, techniques that can be applied, maybe even machines. We'll put a 3D printer in and we'll make this range of gears, because what we found out, that's the one thing that holds up our entire process. So let's make them for $20 instead of $2, because what I'm getting is 100% more throughput.
I agree with that. It's going to happen in cells of excellence, and you already see like cells of excellence, and even within the very large company you used to work for, there'd be I don't know, 100 plants, right? Let's just make a number up. 100 plants, and inside each plant there's 10 to 15 cells. Across a plant, you're going to have one cell that's almost completely automated, and you're going to have another cell that is still banging things with hammers. And literally, I knew a guy who had to have shoulder replacement because he was banging things with hammers. That was part of his day-to-day job. But you'll see that. But I also visited a robotics company one time, a big robotics company, and their crown this. They were so proud of this building that they inside of their facility, that was literally robots making robot components. And there was nobody inside the building. Obviously, like what do you have to have? You have to have a ton of commonality, and today to do this, you have to have a ton of commonality and like standard things that you're doing. And nothing much ever changes, then you can really build that autonomous system to do that thing. But
so you mentioned, from an automation standpoint, cells, right? Do you remember the work we did in your old facility in Greenville, right? Which was people doing exactly the same thing. A small cell, a small group of people doing something much more aggressive in approach, much more integrated in approach. I mean, I don't want to bore people that are listening to this, but I ran a facility. It was a tech center in Michigan, and we had a session. I have the photographs. These are some of the most, I have fond memories of this because how it went. But we had 45 people in a room, and there were basically like 3 people that were the customer driving the process. And you could say that's incredibly wasteful, and at some level it is. But the reality is that's that cell that's functioning exceptionally well that infects the rest of the organization. And maybe there's 2 or 3 other cells that form up. So when a company puts one in an automation sense, they go, hey, maybe we could do this in a half a dozen other places, or maybe I can make a whole cluster of them to do something because there's enough commonality. But that's, again, it's people thinking like machines, machines thinking like people, working more kind of in harmony, as opposed to being afraid that one's going to kill the other's job, sort of thing.
One of the interesting things to me, just listening to this, so not just cells, of course, but full lines and whatever your factory configuration might be, your process configuration. One of the things that I see is that a lot of organizations are pushing hard to become more agile when it comes to changing what's going on in the process, right? And when you think about, to your point, Paul, probably will never be fully autonomous, especially for complex processes. That's something that I question, because how smart would that AI model and that those robots have to be to reconfigure a line and reconfigure a cell and then begin a new process for a new batch for a new PO and all of the moving parts that go into the true lights out future. It's a little sci-fi to me. I don't know.
So I think we're as close to that, what you described, as we are to, tea Earl Grey, right? Going over to the replicator and getting your tea out of the replicator on the Enterprise, right? Star Trek. Star Trek was a science fiction show years ago. Sorry.
I said hot. Earl Grey hot.
Tea Earl Grey hot.
Earl Grey hot. So I think that's a little Star Wars, but the idea that a smaller group of humans and a smaller group of machines and a smaller, more agile set of technology is going to work together to say, we should be doing things. So I'll give you another example. We're a meeting with a medical device company, testing company. And when you're an operations person in these industries that just have never experienced this. You say things and they go, you're saying very simple concepts they don't understand. So these folks are doing radiologic testing. They're sending radiologic samples around the country, and they're talking about they want to build plants where they're going to manufacture the radiologic samples in different parts of the country. Very difficult thing to do, very complex, very costly. And I said, well, why don't you build one or two and have jets fly everything around the country on a day's notice what they need? Oh my God, that's expensive. I said, what are you talking about? You don't know whether you need it. And these are decaying samples. So somebody says, I got to go to the doctor's tomorrow. I got an appointment. I got to get this test. I got to take this, this particular liquid so that it lights up the X-ray or the PET scan, whatever I'm doing. And then I get sick, or, now I get sniffles. So I'm suspected of having COVID or something. I can't go in. Now that sample's gone. They have to do another sample. They have to produce another sample. There are ways to be individually in a pillar, highly inefficient, and create an incredibly efficient network if you rethink the process. So we should resist the temptation to say, how do I build a totally automated isotope manufacturing facility for medical testing, and say, how would I alter the end-to-end process so that process itself becomes far more effective? And in that process might be, automated material handling or loading onto the aircraft or whatever we want to do. I think we'll see a lot more of that. If I were to tell, I wish I were the one to tell you that we would use all the existing mapping technology, all the existing cell phones, and all the existing cars on the road and create an entirely different way, not only to get you from A to B, but to get you a pizza, right? That's a data problem. It's not a car, map, road, destination problem. So if we think about how we streamline that whole process, I think we're a lot closer to that. And frankly, I think it's going to be a lot more valuable than creating an agile organization that creates this supposed lights out factory.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I think we've got just a couple minutes left on the tail end of this thing, Paul, and we've talked a lot about the clipboard and the stopwatch and some of the ways we used to do things, right? If we look at the digital toolbox of what a lot of people are calling this now of tomorrow, as we start to adopt new technologies, I'd love to just get your perspective on what do you think is going to drive that digital toolbox? Is it AR and VR? Is it analytics? Where do you see the most focus from newer technologies?
So at the lowest level, I think it's the data. I think it's the accumulation and transmission of data, not information, right? Not the report that's created from this work cell, but the actual data coming from these particular assets and moving that information. Uber's a data supply chain company. That's the way I look at it. That's why they're so valuable. It has nothing to do with the assets. So I think in the accumulation of data, the movement of the data, these are the fundamental tools. The more those fundamental tools become easily consumed and more pervasive, the more we can tie the security of who are you, what's your role, right? Because there's another piece of data that everybody hates. It's my HR data and making sure my certifications for my team are up to date, because that's a once a year thing. What have you done for me lately? That really should become a way to say, I'm going to give you the ability to experiment with this data in this cell with a little bit of credits on the cloud. And then we're going to give you a grade on that. And then we're going to have everybody kind of compete against each other to see who consumes the available tools and information more effectively. So every aspect of the operational data, every aspect of the kind of the human capital and how they use that data is going to be really important to figure out how we streamline that and how we secure it, right? Because we see all these ransomware attacks coming up recently, and unexplained things. All of a sudden, whole systems go down, and everybody goes, well, whatever, earth wobble. Well, no, somebody's meddling in a system to do that. And then I think it's the analytics that I like to joke about, that are putting hats on cats kind of thing, that are detecting kittens and puppies on the internet. keep doing that for the consumer. That's awesome. We'll take like 2 gens back of that capability and apply it to our operational data. And when you're 4 out, we'll move 2 more up. And we are in operations across the board way behind. If we could just take advantage of like last year's stuff, we would be so much better shape. So I think that, and I think changing the mindset of the people, like how are you going to, is it okay to consume this? Is it okay to give access to this data? Stanley McChrystal's book, Team of Teams, it's actually, there's a great segment in that book that talks about big data and how to use big data and how to enable teams. If you haven't read it, it's an awesome book that touches on that aspect as well.
So folks have to read that, because that's the second plug that's gotten on this this series.
Seriously.
So
and I was also thinking that was what you were describing. I would call the technology readiness level, and I think that's probably the second time that's come up as well.
And look, man, if you're the least bit mechanically inclined as an individual, if you're kind of in this engineering space and you like fixing things, there is no better place to be in than in operations and manufacturing, because Monday morning, first thing starts with a list of things that had broken that you didn't expect. Not broken, but these are the things we hadn't yet understood, and how you can dive into them and fix them. I've 18 years old. I got on a bus to go to my co-op in Tarrytown, New York, and I've been in manufacturing that long. And I got to tell you, I think I have one of the most fun jobs that I could ever imagine. It's really been a great opportunity for me to meet people and learn new processes and learn about technology, and it's only getting better. That's for sure.
It's going to take a little bit of a leap of faith from some organizations and some people, but to our topic here, really, how big is that leap, right? Minimal risk if you do it right, minimal cost, but great stuff, Paul. I think I want to be respectful of your time, and I think we've consumed it all. So
yeah, listen, I would go on and on. Obviously, I get excited about this. I think you guys are doing a great job with these podcasts. I'm really enjoying watching them, and thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me share a couple thoughts on this. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And to all our subscribers and viewers, like and subscribe, leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, we'll see you.